The coffee in my hand had gone cold 20 minutes ago, and I was still holding it like it mattered. Fourth floor waiting room, final chair, a television bolted to the wall playing a cooking show with the sound off. My phone buzzed against my knee. I looked at the screen before I answered it because I already knew who it was, and I already knew I was going to say yes to whatever she asked, and I hated that about myself for exactly as long as it took me to pick up. Maggie. Her voice was doing the thing it always did when she wanted something, soft at the edges, careful, like she was talking to someone she needed to keep calm. I need to ask you something, and I need you to really hear me before you say no. I didn't say no. I didn't say anything at all for a second. I didn't cry. I just listened. That's the whole story, really, if you want the short version. 26 years of being told I wasn't real family, and then one phone call where I was the only family that mattered. But you don't want the short version. Nobody ever does. So let me back up. My name is Margaret. Maggie to the handful of people who've earned it.
I am 68 years old. I live alone in a house on Larkspur Lane that I am not, strictly speaking, supposed to still be living in. And for 32 years, I processed insurance claims and billing disputes at Holloway General, which is a polite way of saying I spent 3 decades learning exactly how paperwork works when people want it to disappear. You'd be surprised how many families think a document stops mattering just because nobody's looked at it in a while. It doesn't. It just waits. Tuesday afternoon, 4 years after my husband Walt passed, is when I married the idea of being someone's grandmother without ever quite being allowed to be someone's mother first. Walt had a daughter already, Diane, 12 years old when I met her, 16 when I married her father, 38 when she looked me dead in the eye at her own daughter's christening and said the sentence I'd spend the rest of my life quietly organizing my whole self around. You're not my real family, Maggie. You never were. I just never made you feel it. She said it kindly. That's the part that still gets me. She said it like she was doing me a courtesy. I want you to understand something about me before this story gets going, because it matters for everything that comes after. I am not a woman who raises her voice. I never have been.
Walt used to say I could end an argument by pouring a cup of coffee slow enough. I learned a long time ago that the people who yell are usually the ones who don't have anything else. I always had something else. I just didn't use it. Not for 26 years. 2 weeks after I married Walt, Diane stopped calling me by name and started calling me her in front of other people. Not cruel, not loud, just a small, careful erasure repeated often enough that it became furniture. Is her coming to Thanksgiving? Ask her if she's bringing the ham. I noticed. I never said anything. I made the ham. I raised that girl through 2 broken engagements, a bankruptcy I quietly helped her father cover without her ever knowing, a wedding where I paid for the flowers and sat 4 rows back so the photos would look right. I was at every birthday. I was at every hospital visit when her babies were born. I was in every family photo, standing at the very edge of the frame, one polite half step outside the huddle, close enough to be present, far enough to never be family. That wasn't even the worst thing she'd say to me, not by a long way, but it's where the story really starts, so that's where I'm starting it. The summer of 2016, Diane hosted her father's birthday at her house, his birthday in her house, because by then that had somehow become the arrangement, and when it came time for the toast, she thanked her mother, who had left when Diane was 6 and hadn't sent a birthday card in a decade, by name, at length, with tears. She thanked Walt. She did not thank me. I had made the cake. The Christmas of 2017, her son asked me, in front of the whole table, why Grandma Carol got a stocking with her name on it and I didn't. Diane laughed, a light, bright laugh, the kind designed to end a conversation before it becomes uncomfortable, and said, "Oh, sweetheart, Maggie's not really a grandma. She's just Grandpa's wife." I remember exactly how the fork felt in my hand. I remember not putting it down. The spring of 2019, when Callie was born, Diane's daughter, my step-granddaughter, though I was never sure I was allowed that word, the hospital handed out a little card for the family tree on the door. Diane filled it in herself. Mother, father, 2 grandmothers, 1 grandfather. My name wasn't on it. When I asked gently if there'd been a mix-up, she said, I didn't want to confuse her.
Kids need things to be simple. And then there was the reading of Walt's will, 3 years after he died, where Diane sat across from the lawyer with an expression I'd never quite seen on her before, a kind of bright, hungry patience. And when the lawyer read that the house on Larkspur Lane was left solely to me, in Walt's own handwriting, in his own words, she smiled at me across the table and said, "Well, that's generous of Dad. I'm sure you'll do right by the family eventually." That wasn't even the part that stunned me. What stunned me was how instantly, how automatically, she assumed the house was hers to be owed, like I was just the paperwork standing between her and something that had always belonged to her. I didn't correct her that day. I just folded my hands and let the lawyer keep reading. 3 weeks after the christening, the one where she told me I wasn't real family, I was in the kitchen at her house getting more ice, and I heard her on the phone with her sister-in-law through the pass-through window, her back to me, her voice low in that particular register people use when they think a wall is doing more work than it is. "She's fine to have around for holidays," Diane was saying, "but I'm not going to pretend she's Mom. Callie doesn't need 2 grandmothers who count."
"One's enough." I stood there with the ice tray sweating in my hand for a long moment. Then I filled the glasses and carried them out, and nobody at that table ever knew I'd heard a single word. That wasn't even the worst thing I'd overhear from that woman, not by a long way, but we'll get there. Here's the strange arithmetic of loving someone who's decided you don't fully count. You keep showing up anyway. Not because you're weak, because you loved their father, and their father loved them, and some part of you keeps hoping the math will change if you just add enough good years to the ledger. I kept adding years. The math never changed. By last spring, I had mostly made my peace with it. I had my house, my garden, my Thursday bridge group, my quiet life. I saw Diane and the kids on holidays and the occasional Sunday. I had stopped waiting to be counted. I want you to know that, because it makes what happened next land the way it's supposed to. It was a Tuesday when the first call came. Not Diane, her husband, Marcus, sounding hollowed out in a way I'd never heard from him. Callie had been sick for months, tired all the time, and what everyone thought was a stubborn virus had turned out to be something in her kidneys, something that had been quietly failing for longer than anyone realized. She needed a transplant.
A living donor, ideally, better outcomes, the doctor said, than waiting on a list that could take years she didn't have. They tested Diane first. Not a match. Marcus? Not a match. Diane's mother, Carol, the one with her name on the Christmas stocking? Not a match. And too old to be considered the sides. 3 cousins on Marcus's side. Nothing. The transplant coordinator, going through the family intake forms line by line, finally asked the question nobody had thought to ask. Is there anyone else in the family we haven't tested? Even someone not related by blood. Sometimes we screen a broader circle. And that's how, on a Tuesday afternoon in a hospital hallway I didn't yet know I'd be spending the next month of my life in, my phone rang, and the woman who had spent 26 years making sure I understood exactly where I stood in her family looked at a chart with no other names left on it and dialed the only number that was left. "Maggie, careful, soft at the edges. I need to ask you something, and I need you to really hear me before you say no." I didn't cry. I just listened.
She told me everything. The diagnosis, the timeline, the narrowing list of possibilities. And somewhere in the middle of it, her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since Callie's christening. And for one unguarded second, she wasn't managing me. She was just a frightened mother. And I felt the old reflex rise up in me before I could stop it. The one that says, "Fix it, Maggie. Make it easier for her." "I'll get tested," I said. "Of course I will." There was a pause on the line, and then she said something that I've turned over in my mind every day since. "I know it's a lot to ask, especially given everything." A small, apologetic laugh. "I never thought I'd be asking you of all people." Of all people. I let that sit in my chest for a moment before I answered her. "I'll get tested," I said again. "That's all I'm agreeing to today." I want to pause here and tell you something the framework of a story like this usually skips, because it isn't dramatic, it's just true. I never once considered saying no.
not because I owed her anything.
Because Callie was 7 years old and had spent every Easter of her life finding eggs in my garden. And there is a difference between a grudge against a grown woman and the grudge against a child, and I have never in my life been confused about which side of that line I stand on. But I want you to notice something else too, because it's going to matter. Diane didn't call to apologize. She didn't call to say, "I was wrong about you, Maggie. I've been wrong for 26 years. She called because the chart had run out of other names. And some quiet, unhurried part of me, the part that spent 32 years reading the fine print other people never bothered to look at, filed that fact away and kept it close. That Thursday came gray and steady, the kind of overcast that never quite commits to rain. I sat in a lab chair with my sleeve rolled up while a technician filled 4 vials, and I thought about Walt. I thought about him a lot that week, actually, more than I had in a long time. He used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when they're being watched. It's what they do at 2 a.m. when nobody's counting. I wondered, sitting in that chair, whether he'd be proud of me for saying yes so fast, or whether some part of him would have wanted me to make her wait, just once, the way she'd made me wait my whole marriage to matter. I didn't have to wonder long. 2 weeks later, a nurse with kind eyes and a clipboard sat across from me and said the words I hadn't quite let myself hope for. "You're a match, Mrs. Whitfield. A very good one." I called Diane from the parking lot. She cried on the phone, real crying, the kind you can't perform, and said thank you more times in 90 seconds than she'd said to me in 90 months. I sat in my car with the engine off and let myself feel, for just a moment, like maybe this was the thing that finally changed the math. That wasn't even close to the worst thing I'd hear that month, but it would take me a little while longer to find that out. If you've ever sat outside a hospital room while people who don't know you're listening talk about you like you're already gone, you know exactly the kind of stillness I mean. Stay with me. This is where it turns. The pre-surgical workup meant a lot of waiting rooms, a lot of paper gowns, a lot of quiet Tuesdays spent being poked and scanned and asked the same questions in slightly different orders. I didn't mind it. I liked, in a strange way, being useful to something bigger than my own routine. I liked being needed for the right reasons, even if the invitation had come for the wrong ones. It was on one of those Tuesdays, in the little family consultation room down the hall from radiology, that I overheard the conversation that changed everything. I'd gone back for my cardigan. I'd left it draped over a chair after a scan, and the door was open a few inches, and Diane and Marcus were inside, and neither of them heard me coming, because why would they? I wasn't supposed to be anyone they needed to watch their words around. That was, in its own way, the whole problem. Once the surgery's done and Callie's recovered, I really don't want this turning into some whole thing, Diane was saying, low and quick. I don't want her thinking this buys her a seat at the table she's never had. Marcus's voice, quieter. She just gave our daughter a kidney, Diane. I know what she gave. I'm grateful. I am. But gratitude and family are 2 different accounts, and I am not going to let her get confused about which one this deposit goes into. A pause. Paper shuffling. And honestly, once this is behind us, I think it's time we talk to her about the house. Dad's been gone 5 years. She's 68, alone in that big place. It's not sustainable for her, and it's not fair to Callie's future either. You want to bring that up now? I want it settled before she starts thinking a kidney means she gets to renegotiate everything. I stood very still in that hallway. I did not make a sound. That wasn't even the worst thing the 2 of them said in that room. That was just the part that made the floor tilt. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't rage. Rage is loud, and I have never once in my life been loud. What I felt was closer to a door quietly closing somewhere deep inside me, a door I'd left open for 26 years, propped with hope, finally swinging shut on its own weight, without a sound. I went home that night and I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in front of me, and somewhere around midnight, I got up and went looking for the box in the hall closet, the one with Walt's handwriting on the lid, the one I hadn't opened since the year after he died. Inside, under his reading glasses and a stack of old photographs, there was a letter. He'd written it the year he was diagnosed, before either of us knew how much time we'd actually get, and he'd made me promise not to read it until I needed it. I'd never been entirely sure what needed it meant.
That night, sitting alone at my kitchen table with my stepdaughter's voice still ringing in my ears, I finally understood. Maggie, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to say it myself, so I'm going to say it now, on paper, where it can't be talked over or forgotten. You gave that girl a mother when hers walked out. You gave her a home she never once had to earn her way into. Whatever she says or doesn't say to you, whatever she understands or refuses to, I saw it, every year of it. The house is yours because you earned it, not because I felt sorry for you. Don't you ever let anyone, including her, tell you what you are to this family. You get to decide that, not them. I sat with that letter a long time. Then I folded it back along its worn crease, put it back in the box, and for the first time in 26 years, I let myself think, not with anger, but with something far steadier, about what it would actually mean to stop waiting to be counted and start deciding on my own terms exactly what I was owed. The surgery was still going to happen. I want to be clear about that, because I need you to understand who I am before I tell you what I did next.
I was never going to let a 7-year-old girl go without a kidney because her mother had said something cruel in a hallway. That was never in question, not for 1 second. This isn't a story about revenge on a child. It never could be. But it is a story about what a woman does with 32 years of knowing exactly how paperwork works once she finally decides to use it. The following Monday, I called a lawyer. Not Walt's old lawyer, a new one. A sharp, unhurried woman named Patricia Ford was specialized in exactly the kind of quiet leverage I was after. I laid it all out for her. The house, the will, the trust Walt had set up years ago that nobody but me had ever bothered to read the fine print on, and the surgery scheduled in 11 days. "You're not trying to punish anyone," Patricia said, watching me carefully across her desk. "No," I said. "I'm trying to finally get put on the family tree card. I'm just going to do it with paper instead of asking nicely." She smiled, just slightly, and started writing. Here is what I decided sitting in that office. I was still going to give Callie the kidney. That was never a bargaining chip, and I told Patricia as much before she wrote a single word. But everything else, the years of being erased, the house Diane had already started measuring for her own furniture, the casual cruelty dressed up as honesty, that I was finally going to answer. Not with a lawsuit, not with a scene, with a folder. Patricia drew up 3 things. First, an irrevocable trust funded from Walt's life insurance policy, the one Diane didn't know existed because Walt had quietly named me sole beneficiary the year he was diagnosed, earmarked entirely for Callie's medical care and education, administered by me, not her mother. Second, a formal amendment to my own will, spelling out in plain language exactly what the house on Larkspur Lane was and was not going to become after I was gone, and to whom. And third, the part Patricia said she'd never actually had a client ask for before, a simple, notarized letter addressed to Diane, laying out the conditions under which I would continue, going forward, to be treated as exactly what I was, family, fully, without asterisks, without a smaller stocking, without a name left off a card on a hospital door. I had the letter sent certified. I wanted a signature on the receipt. 2 days later, my phone started ringing, and it did not stop. Diane at 6:50 in the morning, Diane again at 7:15, Marcus at 9:40, his voice tight and careful, Diane's mother Carol, of all people, at 11, wanting to know what on earth I thought I was doing at a time like this, Diane at noon, Diane at 1, a text at 2 that just said, "Call me back," Diane at 4, then 5, then 5:15, her voicemails getting shorter and sharper each time, like she was running out of the version of herself that knew how to sound careful around me. "Maggie, this is insane. We don't have time for this right now." "Maggie, Callie's surgery is in 9 days. Why would you do this now?" "Maggie, call me back, please. I don't understand what's happening." "Maggie, call me back." I let every single one of them ring through. I watered my garden. I made a cup of tea. I did not feel triumphant exactly. I felt something quieter than that, something closer to relief, the particular relief of a woman who has finally stopped asking to be seen and simply arranged to be unmissable. She showed up on my porch the next evening, unannounced, still in her work clothes,
her mascara smudged in a way that told me she'd cried in the car before she got out of it. "You can't do this to me right now," she said before I'd even gotten the door fully open. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said. "I'm doing something for Callie. I'm still giving her the kidney, Diane. That hasn't changed, and it isn't going to." "Then why the letter? Why the lawyer? Why now of all times?" "Because you told your husband, in a room you thought I couldn't hear, that gratitude and family are different accounts, and that you didn't want me getting confused about which one this deposit belonged in." I kept my voice very even. "I heard you, Diane. I've heard you for 26 years. I just finally decided to answer." She went very pale. "I didn't mean. That was private. That was—" "How much of what you've said about me over the years was meant to be private? How many things have I quietly not mentioned? At Thanksgiving, at Christmas, at your father's funeral, because I decided it wasn't worth the argument." I let that sit a moment. "I'm not angry, Diane. I'm simply done pretending those things didn't count just because I never said anything back." "So what? You're punishing me by taking the house away right when I need you most?" "I haven't taken anything away. The house was always mine." "Your father made sure of that 5 years ago, and you knew it. And you were already planning what you'd do with it before I'd even signed a single consent form for your daughter's surgery." I softened, just slightly, because I could see how frightened she actually was underneath the anger, and I have never once enjoyed watching someone frightened, even her. "I'm not punishing you. I'm finally telling you the truth about where you stand with me, the same way you've been telling me where I stand with you since I was 39 years old." She stood on my porch a long moment, arms wrapped around herself, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, she didn't have a quick, careful answer ready. "I don't know how to be your daughter," she finally said, very quietly. "I never did. I don't think anyone taught me how." "I know," I said, and I meant it. "I'm not asking you to fix 26 years on my porch tonight. I'm asking you to stop assuming I don't count while you decide whether I'm worth the effort. Those apologies you've handed me over the years, I didn't mean it that way, you're overreacting, I never said you weren't welcome. Those apologies were always in the wrong order, Diane. You apologized for how it looked. You never once apologized for what it was." She didn't have anything to say to that. I didn't need her to. "Go home," I told her. "Get some sleep. I'll see you at the hospital Thursday morning, same as we planned. This doesn't change that. It was never going to." The surgery took 4 hours. I remember very little of it, which I'm told is the point of anesthesia. What I remember is waking up in recovery to Marcus's face, gray with relief, telling me Callie's new kidney was already working, already doing exactly what it was supposed to do, and that the surgeons were calling it about as clean a transplant as they'd seen all year. I remember 2 days later, propped up in a hospital bed with a line of stitches I'd be feeling for months, looking up to find Callie's face peering around the curtain, pale and small and grinning in that gap-toothed way 7-year-olds grin when they've decided something is a great adventure instead of what it actually was. "Grandma Maggie," she said. She'd never called me that before, not once, not in 7 years. "The nurse said we're kidney twins now. Is that a real thing?" "It's about as real a thing as there is," I told her, and I felt something in my chest loosened that had been pulled tight since the Christmas of 2017. Diane was in the doorway. She'd heard it too. Grandma Maggie, and something crossed her face that I hadn't seen there before. Not defensiveness, not the bright, managing smile. Something closer to grief, actually. Grief for all the years she'd spent making sure that word never got said in front of her daughter, and what it had cost, and how easily it had turned out that it never needed to. She didn't apologize to me in the hospital room. I didn't expect her to. Some doors don't open in front of an audience, even a small one. But 3 weeks later, once Callie was home and stable and the worst of it had passed, a letter arrived at my house. Not certified, not lawyered, just a plain envelope with Diane's handwriting on the front. I read it once, standing at my own kitchen counter, and I won't tell you everything it said, because some things are hers to have said and mine to have received, and that's where they should stay. I'll tell you this much. It was the first time in 26 years she'd ever apologized for the harm itself, and not for how the harm had made her look. I didn't throw it away. I put it in the drawer of my writing desk, in the same box as Walt's letter, where the things worth keeping go. Things are different now, though I won't pretend they're perfect, because perfect was never on the table, and I stopped wanting it the day I finally stopped asking. Diane calls me now, most Sundays, and not because she needs a favor.
Callie spends every other Saturday in my garden, learning which plants come back and which ones don't. And she has started, without anyone telling her to, putting my name on the top line of every card she makes. My name is on the family tree at her school project this year. Second grandmother, right where it should have been all along. I still live in the house on Larkspur Lane. Nobody has measured it for new furniture since. I water the garden most evenings, and some nights I sit on the porch with a cup of tea and think about a woman who spent 26 years making the ham for a family that wouldn't say her name. And I don't feel angry when I think of her anymore. I just feel like she finally got some rest. If there's a lesson in any of this, I think it's the one Walt tried to hand me years before I was ready to use it. You don't get to decide what someone is to you by simply refusing to say it out loud. And you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to finally, calmly, put it in writing. That's not cruelty. That's honesty with a handle. The coffee's still cold most days when I finally remember to drink it. Some habits outlast the reasons you started them. But most nights now, when I finally turn off the porch light and climb the stairs to a house that is, in every sense that matters, entirely and unmistakably mine, she slept the way a woman sleeps when she has finally stopped waiting to be counted and started, at last, being the one who counts.